what are some like common signs though of like mental distress that people may overlook? Like how did that relate to being like 24/7 on social media?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I don't want to say that there's a concrete answer because I think mental health is it's such a wide area of medicine that's still needing a lot of research. So I'm going to start there.
Yes.
Like if we compare it to cardiology or oncology, there's like a lot of hard testing and things like that. Like we're just beginning to learn, and I'm learning this a lot through my current studies, about like genetic testing and like is there an opportunity for MRIs and things like that to see how the brain's operating, for preventative medicine, let's just say. So there's a lot of research in this field that needs to be done. With that being said, though, the reason why, in addition to the research that still needs to be done, I think also too, it depends on, I'm going to start with genetics. If, you have a family history of XYZ, diagnoses in the family, and that can range from substances to mental health, whatever it might be, then you're at a greater risk naturally, right? Of having a mental illness. And then you throw in your environment. So depending on the environment you grew up in, the family dynamics, the family structure. Exactly. And then you throw in politics and religion and culture and all these sorts of things. It helps to also shape that, our system. And so in our mental health and in its capacity. So when you pair those plus then our life experiences, like Courtney even just said, and so courageously sharing that she has PTSD, that comes with exposure, right? Yeah. Of that's happened in her life that has internalized as PTSD. So those three components really already position us as being vulnerable. And we're living in a society right now where it's like be vulnerable, but then also be hyper independent. And so to be vulnerable, I find that, and even talking to some of my friends and things like that, like even at a very like natural, non-clinical level, people are kind of finding their vulnerability in the posts that they're looking at, but the vulnerability is actually a comparison that they often do, or being hyper positive, like you got to almost find that balance a bit in order to not just feed yourself with goodness, and you might also just be revalidating your own toxic traits sometimes, because life is about growing and learning and all these sorts of things. But then it does place a higher level of responsibility that I don't think that we've been taught how to use on these tools. I think it's just like a free for all. Like, okay, great, go for it. And, where our vision is just so powerful. It's the first thing that makes a judgment with less than 2 seconds to go, And that actually came from a Yale study that I spoke about in my TEDx. And, depending on the post, you judge it so quickly for how attractive it is, how trustworthy it is, how competent you think it is. And so when you pair our vulnerability to our own senses, plus those other factors I just said earlier, it's almost like social media is fantastic, but you must outline boundaries with it, I'll say, because without that, you're already so vulnerable to the amount of content out there. And if you don't kind of have an algorithm that you can tolerate, you're going to cause yourself more pain than you expect. And I was reading a study, I think just a couple of years ago, actually. So maybe the data has changed, but they said that a person that their typical lifespan that where they would endure amount of pain in a lifetime is what we get on a daily basis now because of social media.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. And oh man, that is crazy.
Yeah.
That is really insane. Like, and with that, like to that point, like what would be some, strategies or practical things that, people can put in place in their life to kind of curtail that or to kind of help them maintain a better mental health and well-being overall?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think, going back to evidence-based practices like good old therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, you can never go wrong with, you know what I mean? Yeah. You don't necessarily need a diagnosis for this. It's proven, it works, you know what I mean? And I think too, just not forgetting to listen to your five senses. and even your sixth sense, which would arguably be like your intuition. And I met the Dalai Lama a few years ago when I was in India, just before COVID. And I asked him, like, what are we doing wrong in the West Coast, like in the Western part of the world? Like, everybody's so anxious, depressed, all these sorts of things. And he just started laughing. And he just said, your sixth sense, your intuition, like your gut will not lie, and it's like, it's true. So while you're getting therapy and you're talking to your girlfriends, you're getting everybody else's opinions, you must have an opinion about yourself. And in order to have an opinion about yourself, you need to start listening to yourself first and trusting yourself, those red flags, green flags, whatever, listening to yourself so that you actually have an opinion on something before you're just going to search for other people's thoughts and opinions, because everybody's coming from their own perspective, their own walk in life, and they may not be wrong or right, but now you just have a bunch of thoughts that you don't know what to do with, and now you're overly stressed, and now you're going to look on Instagram or whatever for validation. It's like, it's a vicious cycle.
That is so true. Oh man. I feel like I've had that conversation so many times over the last several years, especially like, being in the corporate world. I work in the corporate world right now, and there's so many like, political politics, like work politics that you have to like try to navigate. And it's like, you feel like you're like two people. You're on when you're at work, and then you're home, and then you're also still having those social media influences. So it's definitely important to check in with yourself. I think that is so valuable for sure.
Yeah, for sure.